Environmental Justice Act, standing in the name of Ms. May.
Ms. May, Sandwich Gulf Islands, seconded by Ms. Sachs, moves that Bill C-226, an act respecting the development of a national strategy to assess, prevent, and address environmental racism and to advance environmental justice, be now read a third time and do pass. Debate. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are not really words to describe the joy and the pleasure and the deep sense of gratitude when a private member's bill gets to third reading and the member who's proposed it gets to stand before colleagues and both ask for further support and express gratitude for the support the bill has received. I want to, of course, begin by acknowledging that we're here on the territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. To them, I express a deep miigwech every single day that we stand on their territory. It's part and parcel of what we're addressing in the piece of legislation today is the history of settler culture impacts on Turtle Island, the impact of policies of exploitation, of amassing fortunes, of capital raised and capital in bank accounts based on taking natural capital and taking it from what's alive to what's dead, at which point we see profit. We also see a disproportionate impact between those people who are racialized, who are low income, who are Indigenous, and the distance between those people and the large profits that are amassed quite far from where they have been exploited. The concept of environmental racism may be new to some people in this House, but it certainly wasn't a new concept to the first member to bring this bill forward. So although this bill, Bill C-226, came to this House, it feels like a long time ago, but in terms of private members' business, not that long ago, this bill came to this Parliament on February 2nd of last year, 2022, at first reading as Bill C-226. But that was not its first incarnation. Its first incarnation was as Bill C-230. And it was a private member's bill of a Liberal member of Parliament who was at that time the member for Cumberland Colchester. I can say her name out loud here. That's one of the sad things about when one of your friends and colleagues is not re-elected, then their name is speakable. Thank you, Lenore Zann. Lenore Zann brought this bill forward. She's still rooting for it. We're still working together. And she did me the honor in the previous Parliament, which is quite unusual, of asking someone not of her party, she's Liberal, she asked me as a Green Party member of Parliament to be her official seconder. And I was honored to do so. We've worked together on this, and it got all the way through second reading. It got all the way through the Environment Committee. It had amendments made to it in the last Parliament. And then, as we all know, there was an election that interceded, and the bill died on the order paper. Since that time in bringing it back, I've had so much support from so many members whose names I cannot say here because they are still members and working hard to help. So I want to start, of course, by thanking the Minister of Environment, who has this in the mandate letter as minister, but in discussions that were enormously collaborative, decided that perhaps, as my private member's bill, it might advance more quickly. And we really have a sense of urgency about getting the bill passed. As we know, the House calendar can get quite clogged with government bills. This one was ready to go, and I drew a low number in the lottery, so we moved forward. I had the support from the very beginning from my friend over there, the member from Victoria, who also laid hands on this bill. One could describe this bill as having many midwives. This is a process, and we're not done yet. The honourable member for Nunavut, the honourable member for York Centre, who's seconding the bill here tonight. We have honourable members from many parties, Aurora Oak Ridges Moraine, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary from Winnipeg South, Toronto Danforth. I know I'm going to leave people out if I keep going. Unfortunately, je veux dire que parce que j'ai plusieurs amis dans les autres partis, j'aurais aimé pouvoir convaincre mes amis de bloc d'appuyer ce projet de loi. Malheureusement, ils ne sont pas maintenant avec moi pour ce projet de loi éminent de députés, mais peut-être, avant le dernier vote, j'espère que peut-être, mais à ce moment, aux côtés des députés conservateurs, ils s'opposent à cet effort pour la justice environnementale. I would have loved to have every member of Parliament in this place supporting the legislation, but thank heavens and thank all of the members who've seen it in their hearts to support the bill. We have the votes, please, for third reading support. Today, right now, is the last moment of debate at third reading. I have another 10 minutes, and I do want to speak to the issues that this bill addresses. We can name the places, we can think of them, and they conjure much longer stories. Grassy Narrows. What does environmental racism mean but that you'd allow a community, but read paper, with contamination of mercury, decade after decade, affecting the community of Grassy Narrows? Sydney tar ponds, now cleaned up, but for decades, the racialized community, the African community, the people, the black population that came from the Caribbean to work in the steel mill, and the land on which the steel mill and the tar ponds were a toxic mess of carcinogenic, toxic waste, the fishing grounds of the Mi'kmaq First Nation. Pictou Landing more recently, and still a threat to Pictou Landing from Paper Excellence that now bought the mill that was shuttered. Ganasatagi, illegal dumping of toxic waste, and the Ganasatagi First Nation. Wet'suwet'en territories. And now we can add to that Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, where Imperial Oil's Carl Mine leaked toxic waste for 9 months, and not the regulator, not the province, and not the company ever thought to warn the community. In those cases, if you wonder what environmental racism is, just ask yourself the question, can you imagine that happening in Westmount? Or south end of Halifax? Any of the neighborhoods that one thinks of, the settler culture neighborhoods, the wealthy neighborhoods, the white neighborhoods. Would Imperial Oil have dared poison a neighborhood of their wealthy shareholders with the toxic waste seeping from the tar, from the tailings, from bitumen production in the oil sands? And the answers present themselves obviously, no. That's the difference. There's a lot of academic work that's been done on this, so I do want to start by giving an enormous vote of thanks to Ingrid Waldron. Dr. Waldron is the champion of environmental racism and promotion of environmental justice in Canada. Her book, There's Something in the Water, was turned into a film documentary. If you want more information on this than you can get tonight, you can find Netflix. And on Netflix, there's a film documentary made by Canadian actor Elliot Page. He based the documentary on Dr. Waldron's book, There's Something in the Water. Dr. Waldron founded something called the Enrich Project. Enrich stands for Environmental Noxious Racial Inequities and Community Health Project. Dr. Waldron's work has been central to this. Dr. Waldron worked in collaborative fashion with Lenore Zann in developing this bill in the first place. What does it look like to talk? What kind of definitions does one bring to bear? Well, Dr. Waldron's definition includes this, it's more, but includes this, quote, the disproportionate location or siting of polluting industries in communities of color, Indigenous communities, Black communities, and the working poor. Pretty comprehensive. We know what that means. But it's more than that. Dr. Waldron also has said, quote, it's how racist environmental policies have enabled the cultural genocide of Indigenous, Black, and other racialized peoples. having looked at environmental racism, the question is, what does it that Bill C-226 will do about it? Well, it will demand of government to develop a strategy to promote environmental justice. What does environmental justice look like? We don't have to look too far. Tomorrow in this place, U.S. President Joe Biden will be speaking to us. In the United States of America, and I hate comparisons where Canada doesn't look good compared to the United States of America, I like the smugness of knowing that we set a good example. Unfortunately, not on environmental racism, unfortunately not on climate either, but since 1994, the U.S. President acknowledged and created a program by executive order in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to promote environmental justice. The Environmental Justice Program in the U.S. EPA this year will spend $100 million on programs at the community level to assist communities to have the tools they need to fight the polluters back, get cleanup, prove the cleanups are needed, prove the health information, access to epidemiologists, access to toxicologists, access to lawyers, and the chance to beat back the polluters that always say, oh, there's not enough here to poison anyone. That would be quite far-fetched. Well, environmental justice programs make the difference by empowering communities so that the polluters don't get away with murder. And I don't mean that purely rhetorically. The U.S. EPA defines environmental justice as this: environmental justice, quote, is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, culture, national origin, income, educational levels, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of protective environmental laws, regulations, and policies. We have a long way to go in this country, but we're not without a roadmap. We know what can be done, and please, if we can, get this bill through third reading, send it to the other place, have the support it will then need from the government of the day, have the support it will then need from a finance minister to fund the programs, such that communities of color, Indigenous communities, poorer communities, are not left without access to environmental justice. We've made some changes in Bill S-5, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, thanks to the Senate. There's more recognition in that bill of aspects of environmental justice and environmental racism. We're making progress, we're inching along, but we need to be bolder, we need to move fast. And it's my deep hope that as this bill passes, and that it will pass, that it will go through the Senate relatively swiftly, that we then will be able to say to every Canadian that justice includes the right to a healthy environment, that justice includes climate justice, that justice includes for the Indigenous peoples that live in Saanich Gulf Islands, that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans no longer says, sorry, you can't harvest any shellfish from your traditional waters, because we've decided without doing any testing that that shellfish is probably not safe to consume. It's safe to consume, all right. It's just that it's an Indigenous community, and taking away their right to fish is perfectly okay with DFO, with no testing. These are issues that can be solved. And as someone who comes and who stands before you as a woman of privilege by the color of my skin, I am deeply, deeply honored to be able to work with the communities for whom this legislation will make an enormous difference for all of the babies, the sons and daughters of the peoples in those communities. Please assist this bill to be more than a strategy, to be more than a projet de loi éminent de député, but to be the law of the land, creating new rights and bringing environmental justice to every Canadian. Thank you. Miigwech. Haishkasiam.